Woohoo! Hey, good morning. It's Conservative Cat on Cities 92.9, the news and talk Bloomington Normal. So do appreciate you tuning in today. Good morning and welcome to the Conservative Cat Show on Cities 92.9. We are your holiday home on the airwaves. I'll be bringing you stories, laughter this morning while you're basting the turkey or setting the table or prepping the pies. I'm going to do that after I get off the air. I'm going to get my pies done. I've got cheesecake, chocolate pie, and pumpkin pie that I'm making today. First year hosting, which is really exciting. But whether you're sitting back and just soaking in the holiday spirit, we are here. We are your holiday home on the airwaves, Cities 92.9, and we hope that your Thanksgiving is very, very special. Today, we're celebrating gratitude, gathering, of course, and good food. And really, this is a Christian holiday. We're going to get to it here in just a second, but I'm going to bring you the true story of Thanksgiving. The true story of Thanksgiving. You were told a bunch of lies, I'm sure, in grade school. So I've got heartwarming tales. We're going to have some lively chats this morning. You can join me on YouTube and on Rumble. And let me know what your favorite pie is. Go ahead, text me 309-451-9299. Text me, let me know what your favorite pie is. Grab a cup of cider, grab a cup of coffee, put your feet up, and just listen to this story. I want to get to this story first here on Cities 92.9. I told you yesterday, today was going to be a special because it's very important that not only you, but your kids, if you've got them, turn the radio up, have the kids listen to me this morning because this is really important stuff. There's a bunch of lies and revisionist history out there, and I'm here to provide you the truth. So Kelly Pierce, I was doing some research for today's show, and Kelly Pierce, she's a deranged leftist idiot, by the way. She gets out there and she starts talking about Thanksgiving. She wrote this article a couple of years ago, and she said this, quote, "To put it plainly, still today, the U.S. continues the bureaucracy that has intentionally kept Native Americans largely in poverty, whilst the majority of the population every year celebrates a holiday built upon stories which seek to bypass the details of the massacre and the genocide of their ancestors." So she's accusing white people of bypassing the story of massacre and genocide against the Native American population. And it just couldn't be further from the truth, folks. So another wacky leftist, his name is Simon Smith. He's a journalist and an activist, and he said this about Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is nothing less than an annual white victory lap. It's a celebration of aggressive Christian denomination and imperialism. Any other description is just politically correct. The holiday, as presented, is an affront to the truth and the history as it occurred. Yeah, I will say that a lot of people don't know the actual truth about Thanksgiving, and we're going to get to the true story here. But I can tell you right now, it doesn't end with the Native Americans being killed by white people. That's not the story of Thanksgiving. It's also not, this fairy tale version of history where you've got the English settlers, the Pilgrims, and the Native Americans breaking bread together and they just loved each other. That's also false. But he goes on. I love this. Simon Smith, this wacky leftist, in his deranged take on Thanksgiving, he goes, "Indeed, the Thanksgiving narrative belies the rape. It ignores the rape and the murder and the genocide that was committed against the continent's first people, women, children, men. To bury the truth behind Thanksgiving means to Native Americans does nothing but set us back as a country." So he's saying that it sets us back as a country if we don't recognize the so-called genocide and massacre of the Native Americans on this day or within this time period. Oh gosh. So let's just get to it, okay? The one, I want to just say it is not the fairy tale version that you got in history class with your grade school teacher. She lied to you. I'm sorry. I don't know. And maybe it's not like a malicious intent here where your grade school teacher lies to you about this kind of stuff. They're public school teachers, right? And if your public school teacher is a raging leftist, she has a motive probably to lie to you about this. Or maybe she's just trying to water it down because it is a story of disease, war, and destruction. But I don't think that we should be sugarcoating it for kids, right? There's definitely a way to tell this story that is, friendly to children. And I'm about to do it right now. So it's not that fairy tale version where the Native Americans and the Pilgrims, they sat around a table and they were like expressing thanks to each other. No, it's not like that. What is Thanksgiving? Children in the U.S. have been taught to celebrate the friendship between the Native American tribes and the first English settlers, and that there was an actual friendship there. That's not true. Today, I want to talk about the real history. The real history is a dark story of war, disease, and destruction of the English settlers and the Native American society. Largely, the Native American society died by disease, but we'll get to it. And you're probably shocked to find out that the Native Americans actually started all of the major battles, the wars, in that time period. And the white people could have all died in one day. The English settlers, all these pilgrims, could have all died in one day had it not been for a man named Edward Winslow. So an argument can be made here that the Native Americans were actually committing genocide and they tried to wipe out an entire population. But because there was one man, one brave man, his name is Edward Winslow, he was the guy who stood up and said, nope, not doing this. I'm going to give myself as a sacrifice. So we're going to get to that story of Edward Winslow. But in order to do this story correctly, I'm going to talk and open really with Rush Limbaugh's true story, a story of the Pilgrims and who they are as a people. Okay, the Pilgrims and where they came from and why they came to the New World. So I'm going to open up with the true story of Thanksgiving, Rush Limbaugh's true story of Thanksgiving. But then I'm going to, add the history. Rush Limbaugh, he didn't get into, the different battles, and I'm going to be talking a lot about Edward Winslow, who is like, I just get so nerdy about Edward Winslow. I love this guy. He is, we should be so grateful for Edward Winslow because Europeans wouldn't have come to or they would have died right there had it not been for Edward Winslow. So the story of the Pilgrims, it begins in the early part of the 17th century. The Church of England under King James I was persecuting anyone and everyone who did not recognize the church's absolute civil and spiritual authority. Okay, those who challenged authority and those who believed strongly in freedom of worship, they were hunted down. This is England in the 1600s, okay? They were hunted down, imprisoned, and sometimes these Christians were even executed for freely worshiping and worshiping their God the way that they wanted to, okay? So the Pilgrims, they were a group of separatists. They didn't want any part of this government, really, the Church of England. It was like a government. And they were a group of separatists, and they fled to Holland. Okay, they fled to Holland. And they liked wooden shoes and cheese, and they established a little community there in Holland. And they were there for about 11 years or so. And after 11 years, 40 of these separatists who liked wooden shoes and cheese, they agreed to make a perilous journey to the New World, America, what we know now as America. So they had heard all about it, and they heard it was an exciting place that hadn't been developed yet, and they knew that they were going to face hardships. They knew that this was not going to be easy, and I can't even begin to fathom the hardship that these people had to endure. We just can't even fathom it as a civilized society. We can't. We're way too advanced now. People who lived in the 1600s would not believe you today if you tried to explain flight or jet travel. They just wouldn't understand it. So they knew they would face hardships getting into that boat and sailing over to the New World. Now, of paramount importance, it is that they wanted to go to this country because they wanted to be free, okay, free to worship their God, and free to have their own beliefs. Okay, that's what they wanted. They were denied freedom in England, and that's why they came. They were freedom fighters. They were freedom seekers. So on August 1st of 1620, the Mayflower set sail. Okay, and it carried a total of 102 passengers, including 40 of these separatists. So it wasn't all of these people who were in Holland fled to Holland. It was just a small amount, 40 people. They were the separatists, and they wanted to go to the New World, and they were led by a man named William Bradford. William Bradford. And on the journey across the Atlantic, I mean, talk about something frightening. Talk about something so scary. This is so scary. I couldn't even imagine. The Mayflower, it was not much bigger than a 50-foot boat. A lot of times, in history class, you think that it's this giant ship. It's a 50-foot boat, and it had 102 people on it, kind of cramped. So on the journey, we've got William Bradford. He established equal laws, okay, something that actually resembles our Constitution, okay, and he created equal laws for these 40 members of the Pilgrim community. And they kind of built this set of laws off of the Bible. So the laws, they all were agreeing to live by. Where did these revolutionary ideas come from? Where did these laws come from? It came from the Bible. Where do our laws come from in this Judeo-Christian nation? The Bible. Okay. So we're talking about this, contract, this agreement that they all kind of signed, and what they did, they signed it, and it is called the Mayflower Compact, and that is what Bradford wrote. Okay, the Mayflower Compact. So this is a group of laws, equal laws for the 40 members, and it incorporated a lot of their religious beliefs, and these were derived from the Bible. So the Pilgrims were people completely steeped in the lessons of the Old Testament and the New Testament. These were Christians. So they were devoutly religious people. Okay, I do want to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to talk about their journey, how they got to the New World, William Bradford, and his detailed journal that was left behind. Okay, so this is a primary document, and you're able to kind of see what that journey was like and when they got there and how that was like for these pilgrims, these 40 separatists. So I'll be right back. It's Conservative Cat on Cities 92.9. Hey, good morning. So do appreciate you tuning in each and every single day. From everything I've read, I don't know if they were Jewish or Christians. Either way, you should be able to freely worship in the way that you want, right? And the Church of England was not allowing them to worship freely and to have their religion, okay? And they get to the New World, and you'll have to stay tuned for the rest of the story. But they get to this New World, and they're faced with all kinds of hardship, of course, diseases, the elements. They get there, there's absolutely nothing. There's no hotels, there's no shelter, there's no food. And they start to build their settlement brick by brick by themselves, right? And then the main point of this story is that you've got the Native American tribe here, and we're going to talk about the Native American tribe in just a little bit, who did not want to die. They were losing numbers, they didn't want to die, and there was a rival Native American tribe who was looking to probably kill this tribe off. And we're going to get to all of that. It's very interesting. It's the Wampanoag tribe. I'm going to butcher these names. The Wampanoag tribe, they wanted to continue their existence. They were on their way to death and destruction via the disease and this rival Native American tribe. Okay, so we're going to get to that. and the exploitation, really, of the Pilgrims. So the Native Americans, they were going to kill off all of these Pilgrims. They never allowed for European settlers to stay much longer than a temporary period of time for trade. They would kill you if you tried to permanently settle. But these Pilgrims did try to permanently settle. They were seeking freedom. And you've got the Native American tribe, the Wampanoag tribe. They were on their way out. They were going to wind up dying, but then they were like, okay, maybe we don't kill these Pilgrims off who are trying to permanently settle. Maybe we team up with them and use them. Okay, that was what Massasoit had attempted to do as the Native American, the Wampanoag tribe leader. Okay, so we're going to get to all of this. I'm very excited. Go ahead and smash that like button. Share this out with your friends. Today we are doing the true story of Thanksgiving, and I know people are going to be like, "Kat, this is propaganda. This is propaganda. I'm Native American. I know. You've been told lies your entire life, and I know it's really hard for people to come to terms with that. Once you hear this story, you're gonna be like, wow, I've been told a bunch of lies, and it's just revisionist history. And the left is going to try to take this and say it was all a bunch of genocide and massacres of the Native American people, which just isn't true. And then I think people on the right have taken this story and warped it and tried to make it seem like the Pilgrims and the Native Americans broke bread together and they were friends, which just isn't true. In fact, the most true statement I could probably make here is that the Native Americans tried to exploit the Pilgrims, for their copper, their settlement, and their people, and they wanted to team up with the Pilgrims to take out a rival Native American tribe. And the Thanksgiving dinner we all think about is actually the Wampanoag tribe. I'm telling you, it's hard to get these things right. Wampanoag tribe and the Pilgrims, they all sat together at a dinner, which usually happens when you end a battle. Actually, it was this major battle that happened, and it wasn't even supposed to be a battle. It was supposed to be a civil negotiation between a couple of Native Americans and the Pilgrims, some surrogates, I guess, that of Massasoit, the Native American leader. But guess what this Massasoit guy did? He tricked the Pilgrims, and they launched an attack, a surprise attack, which is like disturbing, especially during those times. War was never fought that way. Okay, in England or in all of human history, it was never fought that way, where you surprise your enemy, or do a surprise attack when you, under the guise of coming together for negotiations. So Edward Winslow, the only reason why that battle actually stopped was because of Edward Winslow, a white man. So I'm really excited. I'm excited to talk about this. You are trespassing and we told you to leave and you didn't. Actually, that's not true. None of us, okay? You're alive today. It wasn't us, okay? First of all. Second of all, like I told you, the Wampanoag tribe did not want the Pilgrims to leave. They wanted to team up with the Pilgrims to get at a rival tribe. Okay, so it was the opposite. We weren't trespassing. Now, they did permanently settle, which was unusual for the European settlers because they were only there for trade purposes and temporarily there. Early European settlers. The Pilgrims were the first ones to really try something permanent here. And instead of destroying them, like the Native Americans typically did, they wanted to team up with the Pilgrims, actually. Hey, good morning. So do appreciate you tuning in. This is Conservative Cat Cities 92.9. Are you sipping on your cider? Are you sipping on your coffee? Put up your feet and let's dive in to this story, the true story of Thanksgiving. What is Thanksgiving? Children in the U.S. were taught that this is a day to celebrate the friendship between Native American tribes and English settlers, and that is just outright false. It's also outright false that the Native American tribes were all killed by the English settlers, and that the English settlers were trespassing and they were told to leave and they didn't, and they killed all the Native Americans. That's all lies. All of it is lies. There was no friendship. There was nothing like that. There wasn't English settlers killing off Native Americans either. So it's going to shock you to find out that the Native Americans actually started all of the major battles in this time period. And it's going to shock you to find out that a white man, Edward Winslow, he was a pilgrim, a European freedom seeker. I told you about the Pilgrims, why they traveled over here on the Mayflower and created the Mayflower Compact. It's because they were seeking freedom from the Church of England. Okay, they were freedom seekers, freedom fighters. And before I took the break, I was telling you a little bit about, of course, this was a treacherous journey. They were facing hardships on this Mayflower. They finally get there, and they set sail on August 1st, about 1620, okay? And they carried about 102 passengers on the Mayflower. 40 of them were the separatists, the Pilgrims, and they were led by a man named William Bradford. Okay, so on the journey across the Atlantic, talk about something frightening, talk about something scary. They were going into the unknown on a 50-foot boat with 102 people on it, kind of cramped. And then they created the Mayflower Compact, which was it's derived from the Bible, and it really does look a lot like the Constitution. So these were devoutly religious people. Some people think they're Jewish, some people think they're Christians. Really, it doesn't matter. The point of the story here is that they were devoutly religious people. They wanted to worship a certain way. The Church of England would not allow them to do that, so they fled. They stayed in Holland for about 11 years, and then eventually they came over to the New World. So they never doubted that they were going to get to the New World. A lot of journals, primary documentation. They were very devoutly religious people, like I said, and they never doubted once that they would get there and that they would thrive. It's just a matter of how long the journey was going to be, how dangerous it was going to be, and how many people died along the way. So they finally landed, and the Pilgrims, they finally landed in New England around November. Okay, so according to William Bradford's detailed journal, this is a primary source, they found a cold, barren, desolate wilderness. Imagine New England as it exists today, but there's just rocks, forests, and undeveloped nature. Okay, there's just nature and just overgrown forest, and it's November. So it's cold. It's getting colder. And they had no friends to greet them. There was nobody there. And there was no shelter. The only shelter you had was hiding under a tree. There was nothing, folks. It was just desolate. There were no hotels, no inns. There were no places to clean up, okay? This was an actual sad sacrifice. This was hardship. They went out there. They knew they were going to face hardship. It was a sacrifice for their freedom to worship. Okay, we can't forget that these people were freedom seekers, the Pilgrims. During the first winter, remember they arrived in November, so during the first winter, about half of them died. Okay, so 40, you're looking at about 20 now. You've got William Bradford, who was leading the Pilgrims. His own wife died of starvation. They died of sickness. They died of exposure. But eventually they started to build somewhat a permanent settlement. Okay, and it started to look kind of functional, and they started to civilize the land there. So now we're getting kind of close to what you were taught in school. Okay, they've settled, they've kind of got their pans and their pots, their copper, they've kind of created a home here. Whether we realize it or not, we have this image of Thanksgiving, and it's kind of like cartoonish, right? It's the cartoon we were taught in grade school, this freedom or this friendship between the Native Americans and the English settlers, which wasn't, it's just not true at all. So you've got these buckle-shoed pilgrims and these stoic yet friendly Indians, and they feasted together and they had a successful autumn harvest, right? This is what what you're taught in school. And there was this promise of new friendship between these two peoples. The actual history of the Thanksgiving is much, much different than what you were taught in grade school. This is not a autumn harvest. This is not a successful autumn harvest. They weren't feasting together because they had, created a new friendship. That's not at all the story. It's also not true that the white people came in and killed all of the Native Americans. So I want to talk about Charles Mann's book. Now, this is where I'm getting a lot of my information. 2005, 1491, a revisionist history of the pre-Columbian Americans that renders my idea of the first Thanksgiving rather boring. Okay, so everybody always says, oh, multicultural narrative, that the white people came in and then destroyed everybody, right? And that's a really compelling story. Unfortunately, it's not true. And Charles Mann, he points this out in his book, and he uses primary documentation like the journals of William Bradford. We're going to get to Edward Winslow here in just a second. But I'm getting a lot of my information from this book. And I highly recommend you purchase it, read it. I've read it a couple of times. It's great. So the Pilgrims were able to survive and establish their colony. They were able to survive. Like I said, about half of them died. 40 were down to 20. And they were drawn into the political schemes, really, of Massasoit. Massasoit is a Native American leader. He was shrewd, he was calculating, and he was trying to save his own people from apocalypse. Got to take a quick break, but we're going to come back. We're going to talk about Massasoit and the Pilgrims. They had survived, okay? They created this cute little colony, and Massasoit was drawing these Pilgrims into his political schemes, okay? What were those political schemes? He was the military leader of the Wampanoag tribe. It's the Wampanoag Confederation, and he was a political and military leader. That's Massasoit. Okay, so I'm going to come back. We're going to finish up this story. You're listening to Conservative Cat on Cities 92.9, the news and talk of Bloomington Normal. Okay, so we're going to get to Massasoit here in just a second, and the colony, what it looked like for the Pilgrims. Okay, so I mean, you're really hell-bent on this whole, like, they were Jews. Okay, I just don't Jews equals Satan. Like, what are you even talking about, dude? So it doesn't matter if they were Christian or if they were Jewish. These early settlers, these English settlers, okay, who came on the Mayflower, these 40. Now you have to remember there were 102, so there were other European settlers. I'm talking about the Pilgrims. There's this lie out there that the Pilgrims were just a bunch of white people who tried to kill all of the Native Americans, which is just absolutely not true. As I read to you this morning, her name is Kelly Pierce. She wrote an article a couple of years ago, and she said, to put it plainly, still today, the U.S. continues the bureaucracy that has intentionally kept Native Americans largely in poverty, whilst the majority of the population every year celebrates a holiday built upon stories which seek to bypass the details of the massacre and genocide of their ancestors. Of the Native American ancestors. Now, there was genocide, there was massacres, there was destruction, there was disease, there was war. However, the victims of that were actually the Pilgrims in a lot of these cases. And you're going to find out really quick once I talk to you about Massasoit, this Native American military political leader. He had a scheme. And who can blame him? I'm not saying that we should blame the Native Americans at all for anything that they did back then to the Pilgrims or to these English settlers. Okay, this was, their way of life. This is the way they functioned. It's evil, but this is their way of life, and it's the way they functioned. And he was a military leader looking out for his own. He was a tribe leader of the Wampanoag tribe. Okay, now the Wampanoag Confederation, and what he was seeking to do was scheme politically, and you have this today. You have the political schemes. You have, so for example, maybe a state legislator who does something immoral for the benefit of his district. Okay. You've got that happening still today, where you have lawmakers and legislators and elected officials scheming, doing political schemes at the expense of morality and values in order to get something for their district or get something for themselves in some cases. So you've got Massasoit. He's this political military leader of the Wampanoag Confederation, and the Wampanoag Confederation was a combination of villages southeastern Massachusetts there, just so that way you're aware of the geography we're talking about here. But 5 years before the Pilgrims actually arrived, so 5 years before they arrived, you're dealing with diseases brought by the earlier European traders. So, like I said, the Pilgrims were the first ones to kind of like permanently settle. There were always European traders, and the Native Americans were cool with it. Why? Well, they brought over really cool stuff, and they were willing to trade with the Native Americans for like blankets that they made out of furs and things like that. So there was trade going on. So the Native Americans were not peeved off with the Pilgrims permanently settling, by the way. They were very used to European traders coming over temporarily. Now, nobody really permanently settled, one, because nobody had the cojones or the bravery that the Pilgrims did to kind of create their own little space and their own colony. Because it's hard work. It's difficult to create something like that from nothing. But they did it. They created a colony. And Massasoit saw this as a way to guarantee the survivability of his Wampanoag Confederation. Okay, 5 years before the Pilgrims arrived, Massasoit's people in the Wampanoag tribe, they were almost killed off by all of these diseases brought in by the early European traders. Okay, so I'm not saying that the European traders were blameless, but there was diseases. There wasn't modern medicine. They brought it over when they were trading. The Massasoit, Wampanoag tribes, all of these Native American tribes were cool with the European traders. They were even cool with the Pilgrims permanently settling there because it was politically advantageous for the Wampanoag tribe, by the way. We're going to get to that, but Massasoit, he was in a bit of a bind because his Wampanoag tribe, his district, okay, they had some enemies. They had a rival Native American tribe, the Narragansett tribe. Narragansett tribe. It was a rival tribe to the west of them. So we're going to get back to this story. Smash that like button, share this out with your friend, grab the kids, kick up your feet, drink some apple cider and some coffee. We're going to get into this. Woohoo! Hey, good morning. It's Conservative Cat, and we are your holiday home on the airwaves. Whether you're basting your turkey, setting the table, getting your pies prepped, or you're just soaking in the holiday spirit, we're here to bring you stories, laughter, and we want to make your Thanksgiving special, which is why I started telling you the true story behind Thanksgiving, the true story of Thanksgiving. Now, before I took the break, I was telling you a little bit about Massasoit. Massasoit is a military and political leader. I was telling the folks on the stream, YouTube Rumble, you can go there. I was telling them that, you know, we still have this today. We have military leaders, we have legislators, political leaders who do anything and are willing to do anything, even if it's immoral, for the benefit of their district, okay, or for the benefit of themselves. We have, you know, legislators who will do immoral things to, you know, get more money into their district. We still have this today. So I am in no way trying to make Massasoit an evil villain here. because we still have this today. And what he was doing, he was just the way of life back then. Okay. He was a political and military leader. He had a responsibility for his people. So, like I said, Massasoit, he was the leader of this, really, it was a combination of villages in southeastern Massachusetts. And about 5 years before the Pilgrims arrived. Remember, the Pilgrims arrived on the Mayflower. They were fleeing religious persecution. They were freedom seekers, and they came to the New World, and they finally established, they survived about 20 of the 40 Pilgrims that came over on the Mayflower. They survived, and they established a colony. But they were drawn into the political schemes of Massasoit. He was a shrewd and calculating Indian leader who was trying to figure out how to save his people from an apocalypse, quite literally. So that his people were going to be decimated. 5 years before the Pilgrims arrived, they had been stricken by diseases by the early European traders. Now, remember, the Native Americans were not against the European traders coming over. They were against, traditionally, them permanently settling. A lot of European traders never tried this before, where they permanently settled in the New World. They would just come over and trade with the Native Americans. But this was the first time the Pilgrims, they were the first ones to kind of permanently settle. And usually the fate of the permanent settlers, or people who tried to build a colony, would be death automatically from the Native American tribes. Okay, you would just die. But entire villages had been depopulated by disease, including the Patuxet village. I think I'm saying that correctly. Patuxet village. And this is exactly where the newly arrived Pilgrims had settled. Okay, it was totally depopulated, Patuxet, and they settled it, and they called it New Plymouth. Okay, so all of the Native Americans were dead where they had settled. Okay, now Massasoit, he was in a bit of a rut. He was in a bit of a bind because there was an epidemic that hit the Wampanoag tribe, his tribe, and they hadn't touched their enemies to the west in quite some time. They hadn't gone on the offensive, and there was just this kind of pressure that Massasoit had with this enemy tribe. He was worried that they were going to overrun his people because his people were weak. Remember, they were struck by disease 5 years before the Pilgrims had arrived. So they had enemies to their west. The enemies were called Narragansett tribe. Okay, so this was a rival tribe, and he was worried about that tribe overrunning his weakened people someday. So he decided to gamble. Usually, like I said, if European traders who were there temporarily tried to settle permanently, they'd be met with death from the Native Americans. But a lot of European traders never tried that, really, because it's hard to do. And these people did it because they were fleeing a very bad situation. The Church of England was trying to persecute them for their religious beliefs. So they were kind of the first ones to try to permanently settle. Anyway, so the European traders had been visiting New England, like I said, for at least a century. There was no permanent settlements, really. If they had tried, the Native Americans would kill them right away. Massasoit didn't do that to the Pilgrims, who had settled in New Plymouth, okay, what used to be the Native American tribe village called Patuxet. Okay, so they were just forbidden from establishing permanent settlements. Now, the relationship was strictly transactional between the European traders, these temporary European traders, and the Native Americans. Strictly transactional. They weren't friends, okay? But the Europeans did have good things to trade, okay? The Indians had no good reason to not take advantage of these strange newcomers, right? Now, there are actually journals, the Indians would call them straw-like hair, animal-like hair. They would make fun of these pale foreigners. They said they had peculiar blue eyes. There's primary documentation that said that the Native Americans thought that they were oddly dressed and they were too talkative. They said that they were so talkative, which is kind of interesting. And they thought that they were kind of incompetent, the pale settlers or the pale foreigners, European traders. And they were like, these guys can't even do basic tasks. And why would they trade with us? They're kind of silly people. They're trading with us copper kettles, this glittering colored glass, steel knives, hatchets, things that they'd bring over from England to New England to trade. And then the Indians gave them like cheap furs, right? So think of it like this: you're in a uh, a mall, and you go up to a kiosk, and they give you you give them electronic goods like a cell phone in exchange for some used socks. Okay, so that's kind of the comparison here. I mean, of course, they were willing to overlook the European traders' peculiarities and their blue eyes, and how short they were. And how talkative they were, because they were getting all of these really cool things in trade, and then they were giving the European traders furs, cheap furs, right, that they make from the animal skins. Now, Massasoit, let's get back to him. Massasoit, his plan was to allow the Pilgrims to stay. Like I said, traditionally, the European traders never stayed very long. This was a very different case because the Pilgrims were fleeing the persecution of the Church of England. Massasoit wanted the Pilgrims to stay as long as they allied with them, the Wampanoag tribe, his tribe, against the Narragansett tribe. Okay, so the rival tribe. He wanted buddies because he was in a weakened state. He was worried about the rivaling tribe, and he was willing to meet with them. But it almost ended in well, it did. It ended up in a bloody battle, the first meeting. So I got to take a quick break. I'm going to talk about this first meeting with the Pilgrims and the Massasoit surrogates. There were two surrogates. You might actually recognize Squantum, which is Squanto, to Squantum. He's better known as Squanto. That was one of the surrogates to go over to talk and meet with the Pilgrims. And then there was another one, Massasoit. He was a trusted ally of Massasoit. The second was not a trusted ally. The second one being Squanto. He was not a trusted ally of Massasoit, but he sent over two interpreters, people who spoke English, by the way, into the Pilgrim settlement. And sometime in November 1620s. Okay, so he sent them over there to meet with them, and the meeting didn't go quite as planned. Let's just put it that way. If you want more, you got to come back on the other side. It's Conservative Cat Cities 92.9, the news and talk of Bloomington Normal. I'll trade you a cell phone for a buffalo hide. Yeah. Well, and I mean, I don't know. This was you're missing the point. Okay. You're kind of missing the point here, where I don't know exactly everything they had. But the point is they were bringing things over from a civilized society. I don't think that we can argue with that here. The Native American tribes were not civilized. Okay. As in, they were not bathing. They were not they did not have a civilized, modernized society. I mean, I don't think anybody argues with that. They had a different way of life. It doesn't mean that it was terrible. I'm not going to sit here and say it was terrible. Like I said, Massasoit, I'm not trying to make him into an evil villain here. But he was a political leader, and he was scheming politically, and he had corrupted character. And the reason why was because he had everything to gain from that corruption, and everything to gain because he did not want his tribe to die, the Wampanoag tribe. Okay, he just did not want this tribe to die, and he was willing to kind of use the Pilgrims, and we're going to get to that in just a second. But like I said, I mean, I don't really know everything that was traded. I wasn't in the time period, right? Now, primary documentation will tell you that the English, the European settlers, if they didn't have good stuff to trade, they would have died. Okay. They were willing to overlook. I mean, there was primary documentation about what these Native Americans said about the pale foreigners. They called them pale foreigners. They had peculiar blue eyes. And there was actually this entry where a Native American had called a white guy animal-like hair, and the animal-like hair like wrapped around his face, and they said that they talked too much. They were willing to overlook all of that. Okay, they didn't really like the way these people looked, even, but they were willing to overlook all of that because they brought good stuff over. They had all kinds of things like these steel knives, hatchets. Now, I don't know, maybe they had like the Native Americans already had copper. I don't know, but they wouldn't have let the early European traders live had it not been for their good stuff that they were trading. Okay. They overlooked how silly they looked and oddly dressed they were and how they didn't look like them because they had good stuff. Okay. And this just goes to show you what's in it for me. What's in it for me mentality is still there. Massasoit, what's in it for me? You know, if I can use the Pilgrims and their permanent settlement here to my advantage, and if it's politically advantageous to me, then I'm not going to kill them. I'm actually going to use them. And that's what he's doing here. This was not like, oh, they're permanently settled and they did it without our knowledge and they killed and massacre all the Native Americans and they permanently settled here without our permission. Not true. Not true at all. Massasoit allied. Attempted to ally. It didn't go well. We're going to get to that, but he wanted to ally with the Pilgrims, the Wampanoag tribe, because they had this rivaling tribe that he was worried about, and they were struck by diseases 5 years before the Pilgrims came, and he was worried about the existence of his tribe. So he partnered with the Pilgrims to go after the rivaling tribe, the Narragansett tribe. So we're going to get to all of it. Squanto, of course, is this friendly little Indian from our grade school textbooks who teaches the Pilgrims, how to plant corn and fertilize crops with fish, right? You guys remember the grade school story? Wrong. That's not the truth about Squanto. And they changed his name too, and to give him a nickname that's kind of memorable. Tisquantum is his actual name. So we're going to talk about it here. Woo! Hey, put up your feet, drink some of that cider. We're getting right back into our story here. It's Conservative Cat, and I'm bringing you the true story behind Thanksgiving. Before I took the break, I was telling you a little bit about Massasoit's plan to allow the Pilgrims to stay. Now, there's this misconception, or this just blatant lie that people tell you, that the Pilgrims came in, they forced their way into the New World, and they permanently settled there, and then they killed all the Native Americans and they stole their land. Wrong. Not true. So Massasoit, a Native American political military leader, he wanted to ally with the Pilgrims, like I said, because his Wampanoag tribe had faced disease and destruction 5 years prior to the Pilgrims actually coming over. And there was this growing force to the west of them. It's called the Narragansett tribe. This was a rivaling tribe, and he was nervous as a leader for his people and his district. And what he was doing was a political scheme. He was scheming, and he wanted to allow the Pilgrims to stay, which was kind of out of the ordinary. Usually, if anybody else tried to permanently settle, you'd die. Okay, but the Pilgrims were kind of the first ones to permanently settle because they were fleeing religious persecution, like I said, and not a whole lot of people were willing to permanently settle because it was hard to do. It wiped out half of the Pilgrims, like I said, 40 to 20 Pilgrims, just by trying to create this colony from nothing. Okay, they created something from nothing. Now, like I said, there was a meeting planned with the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag tribe, Massasoit's tribe. So Massasoit, this leader, he sent out 2 interpreters to the Pilgrim settlement, and the first name that we have to remember is Samoset. Samoset was an interpreter, and he was a trusted ally of Massasoit. The second was Squint. I keep wanting to call him Squanto. Squantum. He has a different name than Squanto. We nicknamed him so that way it would be easier to remember his name. And of course, we remember Squanto as the friendly Indian from our grade school books, our grade school textbooks. And he teaches the Pilgrims how to plant corn and fertilize crops with fish, yada, yada, yada. The truth about Tisquantum, that's it. The truth about Tisquantum is that he was actually a member of the Patuxet tribe. Now, you guys remember the Patuxet tribe. Like I said, that's actually where the Pilgrims had settled because it was completely wiped out. The Patuxet tribe was completely wiped out due to diseases. And he was worried, of course, about the Wampanoag confederation. Now, it was built up of multiple tribes, and the Patuxet tribe was completely wiped out prior to the Pilgrims even getting there, like I said. So Massasoit was worried about the Wampanoag confederation. It was like a bunch of tribes mixed into one, and he was worried because they were dealing with disease and destruction, and there was this rivaling Indian tribe to the west of them. So the Squanto, I want to get to him. He kind of had his own journey. So he went and he actually learned English. He was an interpreter of Massasoits, and he actually learned English because he encountered a journey of his own. Okay. 7 years before that first Thanksgiving, which I'm going to get to here in just a second, Tisquantum was captured by British soldiers and sold into slavery in Spain, and he was eventually freed by Roman Catholic priests. Okay, so he was sold into slavery. This guy was probably mentally ill, probably dealt a very, very poor hand, was captured by British sailors, and he was sold into slavery in Spain. So, very tragic, but guess what? White people, Catholic priests, eventually made it to where he was freed. Okay, white people captured him, but white people freed him as well. And he made his way to London, and he learned English, and there he kind of served as a talking piece, as a conversation piece at a rich man's house. It wasn't really like he was enslaved at this rich guy's house. He just kind of worked for him, and he kind of served as a talking piece. And we're going to come back for the rest of the story here at the top of the hour. You're listening to Conservative Cat on Thanksgiving Day. We're going to come back with this story next. Hey, go ahead and smash that like button. Smash that like button. Yeah, he was probably mentally ill. No, so you've got to stick around. You've got to stick around. This guy is not your friendly Indian, okay? He was likely very, very damaged from those 7 years of being enslaved, okay? And when I say mentally ill, like he went through this terrible circumstance in his life where he was sold into slavery, which was very common for white and brown people. In that time period, people were captured and they were sold into slavery. But there was a light at the end of his tunnel. Roman Catholic priests, they released him and they eventually got him to be free. Then he made his way to London as a free man, where he learned English in this household when he was serving in this rich man's house. Okay, and he kind of served as like a conversation piece, and like but it was all consensual. Okay, he wasn't for 7 years he was enslaved. He wasn't enslaved the entire time. Tisquantum eventually arranged for passage back to North America. And what he finds there probably ultimately leads to his insanity as well. I say that he's mentally ill because we're going to find out something that Squanto does, or Tisquantum does. And in this story, he's not the good guy. let's just say he probably was not a friendly man at all. He was very bitter because he was sold into slavery. He was captured by British sailors. He was sold into slavery. And then he comes back to North America. He arranges for his passage back to North America, and then he gets back to Massachusetts. And this was about a year and a half before the Pilgrim meeting. Okay. And it's tragic. He found his entire family, his entire tribe, the Patuxet tribe. Remember, I told you about them. They were wiped out by disease. Okay. Now, there was the Wampanoag Confederation. The Patuxet tribe was its own tribe. And to Squanto goes to Massasoit, and he tries to present himself to the Indian leader to take him in onto the Wampanoag Confederation and to take him in. Like I said, it was probably not a great go at life for Tisquantum. And he probably has a bit of insanity going on. He was sold into slavery. Then he makes this treacherous journey back. I'm sure it was pretty tough to get back to North America, but he finally gets back and he finds out his entire family was, wiped out from disease. So he was a bitter man, probably very bitter and mean. So he was not friendly. And we're going to talk about the Pilgrims and Squanto and all of that here. Hopefully I can, I'll get to the end of the story here. We've got about an hour left of this program, so go ahead and smash the like button, share this out with your friends, hit that like button and share it out. It's very important that we get this shared out because people need to know the truth about this kind of stuff because, I think that there's a little bit of mistruth on both sides. You've got the side that says that, the Native Americans and the white people were very friendly with each other. And then you've got the side that says, the Native Americans were just completely wiped out by the white people, which isn't true. In fact, and I know that this is going to be controversial, but it's the truth. The Native Americans, they were trying to use and abuse the Pilgrims here for their own political gain with this rivaling tribe. And this is the truth. It's the truth. And, I'm not disparaging the Native Americans for that. This kind of stuff happens all of the time where you've got your own selfish interests and you're willing to do anything to help your people. Okay, it was his people. Massasoit was trying to do everything he could for his people, and he didn't want to see them die. So his only choice and his only political option here was to partner with the Pilgrims, and it was a scheme. Okay, because we're going to find out later that the Pilgrims probably shouldn't have trusted Massasoit. They had arranged for this meeting to happen between these two interpreters, Squanto and Samoset. Like I said, Samoset was a trusted ally. Squanto was not. Squanto was Tisquantum, is his actual name. He's a very bitter guy, which is probably why Massasoit did not trust him, because he was so torn up inside over what had happened to his family when he went back to Massachusetts, and went back to North America. Smash that like button, share this out with your friends. See, I don't think. All right. So, one, we don't allow cussing on the page. So, I'm going to have to take the comment down. But we welcomed you immigrants and helped you guys survive and look at the evil you do. Now, let me back up a second. We were immigrants, yes. You did not help the immigrants. What are we talking about here? First of all, you weren't alive in the time period, okay, at all. You were not alive in this time period, and most likely a lot of these people were not your ancestors. But the immigrants were not helped in any kind of way. They were slaughtered, actually, by the Native Americans. And we're going to get to that story here in just a second. But they were used and abused by Massasoit, a political military leader. And I'm not trying to paint him as a bad guy. It's just the way life happens, where you've got this political leader who is trying to do everything he could for his Wampanoag Confederation. Hey, good morning. We're going to get right into the Thanksgiving story, the true Thanksgiving story. I so do appreciate you tuning in. Kick your feet up, drink some apple cider. Maybe you're prepping the table. Maybe you're getting your pies ready. Maybe you're basting the turkey. I wanted to bring you the true story of Thanksgiving because I think far too often we have this cartoon image in our head that it's, oh, the Native Americans and the English settlers, they were best friends and they broke bread together and they had this big Thanksgiving feast. Or you've got the wacky liberals who say, oh, Native Americans, they were all genocide massacred by the white people. And that's just not true. Here's the truth. There was a meeting. Massasoit's plan to allow the Pilgrims to stay. This was politically advantageous for Massasoit, like I said. He was trying to ensure the survivability of the Wampanoag Confederation. There was a threat to the west that he was worried about. That's the Narragansett tribe. And he was worried about them. So what he did, he arranged a meeting between the Pilgrims and two of his interpreters. One of them was Massasoit. He was a trusted ally of Massasoit, the political military leader of the Wampanoag Confederation. And the second interpreter that was sent over to meet with the Pilgrims and to create this ally in this relationship was Squanto, or Tisquantum is his actual name. And he's not a friendly Indian, folks. He's not the friendly Indian from our textbooks who teach or would teach the Pilgrims how to plant corn and fertilize their crops with fish. He didn't do any of that. The truth about Tisquantum is that he was a very bitter man, for good reason. He was a member of the Patuxet tribe, like I told you. That's a tribe within the Wampanoag Confederation. And he came back to North America to find that the Patuxet tribe was completely decimated. Now, like I said, he was sold into slavery for 7 years. He was captured by British sailors, and he was sold into slavery in Spain. And eventually he was freed by white people, by the way, Roman Catholic priest. He was taken in to slavery by white people, but then he was released by white people. Good white people, Roman Catholic priests. So he made his way to London. He learned English and he served in this white man's house, this rich white man's house. But he served as not a slave. He was willing to be there and he served at his own free will, right? So he wasn't enslaved for the entire time he was over in London or the entire time he was on that continent. He came back to North America and he arrived in Massachusetts. He wanted to go back to his Patuxet tribe. Now, this was about a year and a half before Massasoit's meeting with the Pilgrims, this arrangement with the two interpreters, right? This was about a year and a half before Massasoit's meeting with the Pilgrims. Squanto, he found the entire tribe had been wiped out from disease, which I told you about earlier. This is the reason why Massasoit is so worried about the rival tribe to the west of the Wampanoag Confederation. It's because a lot of the tribes have just died off from disease at this point, and he's worried. That's why he teamed up with the Pilgrims, which is not your traditional way of going about things during this time period. He did not, most Native Americans would kill you if you permanently settled there as a European trader. There were early European traders, but they were only supposed to stay temporarily, and they didn't like when you permanently settled. The Pilgrims did it because they fled religious persecution. But Charles Mann, the book, his 2005 book, describes Tisquantum's former home along the New England coast as, quote, a cemetery 200 miles long and 40 miles deep. This is a ton of people died in this Patuxet because of diseases that broke out, okay? And they were hit by this disease, and not a single person remained, and Tisquantum's entire social world had vanished. So he's a bitter, bitter man, and I totally get it. A bit insane, probably at this point. So Massasoit didn't trust him, naturally, because he was a bitter guy and he was not nice. And he kind of was kept in captivity. So here you see Massasoit capture and keep him in captivity and use him as a slave and as an interpreter. And he would monitor his actions closely, Massasoit, with Tisquantum. Okay, now Tisquantum, after finding out that his whole entire family died, he presented himself to Massasoit and kind of begged to be a part of the Wampanoag Confederation and be a part of a tribe within the Wampanoag Confederation. And Massasoit agreed, but he kept him in captivity. So you see Native American enslaving a Native American. Okay, so it wasn't just white people who enslaved people. It was this Native American leader, Massasoit, captured and kept him in captivity and monitored him. After this poor guy, Tisquantum, loses his entire family, by the way. So let's get to the meeting with the Pilgrims and the two interpreters, Massasoit and Tisquantum. These are the two interpreters that were sent over. And this was at some point in November. And what's really, really so messed up about this, Massasoit, he sent them over, these two interpreters, and he and the rest of the Wampanoag Confederation, the Indian Party, kept out of sight from the Pilgrims, okay? So this was already arranged. This was arranged where the Pilgrims would meet with the two interpreters. It would be fine. But a tense encounter happened. This is where it gets really, really sad. This encounter ended with the Pilgrims. It could have endly abrupted the Pilgrims' mission of settling in the New World. There could be no Europeans over in North America had things gone differently here. So this was a tense encounter. Massasoit and Tisquantum spoke with the colonists, spoke with the Pilgrims for about an hour. Okay, now perhaps they gave a signal. We don't know if they gave a signal, or perhaps Massasoit got impatient and he simply was following a prearranged schedule of his. But in any case, what happened, whether the two interpreters signaled to the rest of the Indian Party and Massasoit, or he just got impatient, they appeared without warning at the crest of the hill on the south bank of the creek that ran through the foreigners' camp. Okay, alarmed by Massasoit's sudden entrance, the Europeans withdrew to the hill to the opposite bank, and they had a few cannons, and they had a standoff. They started to fight. So it was actually all started by the Massasoit Wampanoag Confederation. They were hiding. Meanwhile, there was this false negotiation, or this fake negotiation happening with these two interpreters that Massasoit sent up there. Ultimately, this standoff, or this war, this battle, ended with Edward Winslow. Now, this guy, I love Edward Winslow. The really cool guy. He later served as the governor of Plymouth Colony. And he gives a very detailed primary documents account of the first Thanksgiving, okay? He waded through the creek wearing a full suit of armor, carrying a sword, right? Because they were on the defensive. They had this surprise attack happen in their camp, okay? And he was wearing a full suit of armor, carrying a sword. He wades through this creek, and he offers himself up. He says, "I'll go. I will be hostage." Through, Tisquantum, he tells Tisquantum, tell them, because they're interpreters, and he spoke English, and he said, tell them I'll go as a hostage, and until we can kind of reach negotiations, I will accept the fate that comes with being a hostage. And Massasoit accepted. He says, yes, we'll take the hostage. And Tisquantum and about 20 of his men crossed over the creek into the Pilgrim settlement. So there was not all of the Indian Party, but some of the Indian Party. So about 20 of the men that were there that had done this surprise attack into Squantum had gone over across the creek into the Pilgrim settlement, and there is where the negotiations came. Okay, but these negotiations wouldn't have come had not the Pilgrims first offered Edward Winslow as a hostage. Okay, the only reason why the negotiations happened was because, and this alliance agreement happened, was because Edward Winslow, a white man, was willing to throw himself into captivity. That's really what this was. And this Thanksgiving feast that everybody talks about, this was pretty common after a large battle, that the men would get together if there were negotiations or an alliance agreement that had to take place. They'd get together and they would sit around and eat, because battle is exhausting, and they would sit around and eat. So that's the Thanksgiving feast. This isn't friendship, okay? This was negotiations, and the only reason why the negotiations were happening was because Edward Winslow offered himself up as a sacrifice. So Squantum had plans for reestablishing the remaining Patuxet tribe. Okay, he wanted to kind of break off from the Wampanoag Confederation and create his own Patuxet. Okay, like I said, this guy's kind of mentally unstable, a little bitter. Obviously, he comes back to North America after being enslaved for 7 years. He comes back and he's like, wait, everybody is dead from disease, and my whole social world has just crumbled. And now I'm a slave to Massasoit, who doesn't trust me, right? And I've been enslaved by this Massasoit guy. And he's a bit bitter, right? So he wants to convince parts of the Wampanoag Confederation that he'd actually make a better leader than Massasoit, and he wants to reestablish the Patuxet tribe with his own people. Now, to do this, he tried to play the Pilgrims and Massasoit against each other. So I'm going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about Squanto, the friendly Indian, who's not so friendly, by the way. He actually tried to play the Pilgrims and Massasoit against each other in the spring of 1622, and he had a little plot. He told the Pilgrims that Massasoit was going to double cross them by leading a joint attack on Plymouth with the Narragansett tribe. Now, this is the rival tribe of the Wampanoag Confederation. Like I told you, this is the whole reason why Massasoit didn't kill the Pilgrims right away. He wanted them because he needed them to go into battle against this rival tribe, the Narragansett tribe. But what Squantum tried to do was tried to turn them against each other. So he was trying to say that, hey, don't believe him when you guys go and attack this rivaling tribe. He's going to double cross you, and then they're going to turn their swords on you, and they're going to kill all of you. Okay, that's what Squantum had said, but that wasn't true. And it didn't work because cooler heads prevailed. Massasoit learned of Squantum's failed plot. And what happened to Squantum after Massasoit learned of this? We're going to get to that here next on Conservative Cat Cities 92.9, the news and talk of Bloomington Normal. Hey, good morning. So do appreciate you tuning in each and every single morning, 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. Now, I am bringing you the true story of Thanksgiving. Cooler heads prevailed. Squantum was trying to plot, and he had told the Pilgrims that Massasoit was planning on double crossing them. They did reach negotiations and an alliance agreement in exchange for Edward Winslow, Edward Winslow. In exchange for him, they were willing to sit down to have negotiations. Like I said, this was a surprise attack. So when people say, like, oh, the white people just like went in and killed everybody and they permanently settled there without the permission of the Native Americans, not true. This tribe leader, a major military political leader, Massasoit, wanted the Pilgrims there because it was politically advantageous for him to have them there. They were going to use the Pilgrims and go into battle against this rival tribe. And this whole like, oh, genocide, massacre, this was really shady. This is not the way war was traditionally fought. This is the way that the Native Americans fought war, where they simply did this surprise attack. Usually that's not something that happens. When you send two people, two interpreters in there and with good faith, and you send them in there to negotiate. And it was an hour or so of negotiating going on between these two interpreters and the Pilgrims. And then all of a sudden you break out in war. And now I don't know if there was a signal, if this was planned from the beginning, or he just simply got impatient, or what was going on. But Massasoit, he led this Indian party without warning into the foreigners' camp. And this, of course, alarmed the Pilgrims, and then they fought back. They withdrew to the other side here of the hill on the opposite bank, and they had a few cannons behind a half-finished stockade. Okay, so this was not planned on the Pilgrims' part to, kill some of these Native Americans. This was a standoff that was started by the Native Americans. There was no reason to do this. They were in the middle of negotiations. They could have just talked it out, but they were the ones who had launched this attack into their camp, and then they fled up the hill. Okay, now you can believe this, you cannot, but primary documentation says that this is all true. We did allow you to stay. I'm not ignoring that. I said that. So stop with the we. I just don't understand that. So the story here is that Massasoit and the Wampanoag Confederation allowed the Pilgrims to stay because it was politically advantageous for the Pilgrims to stay, because they were going to use the Pilgrims, create an allyship where they would go and fight this rival tribe. Okay, so I'm not ignoring that. It is true that they allowed, that was very odd. That's very odd that they had let the Pilgrims stay, because permanent settlers were met with death. The early European traders prior to the Pilgrims, they would come over temporarily and trade with the Indians and with the Native Americans. And the Native Americans allowed that. They loved that, by the way. It wasn't like we were forcing, these kettle pots and these hatchets and the beautiful glass vases down the throats of the Native Americans. The Native Americans were giving us like what's comparable to an old sock, right, for a cell phone. Okay. And we were cool with it. The European settler or the European traders were cool with it. They were all cool with the trade. Okay. Now, the only stipulation was that you did not permanently settle. Otherwise, you'd be met with death. Okay. And what happened here was that the Pilgrims, they ignored this rule. They did ignore the rule. I will acknowledge that. They ignored the rule because they were fleeing, by the way, religious persecution. And they fled religious persecution to come over to the New World and set up camp, okay? Now, what the Native Americans could have done, Massasoit, what he could have done was just wipe them out, okay? But instead, he politically schemed the Pilgrims into his allyship and kind of enslaved them, if I'm being honest here, because they had to work with this. They went in, surprise attack, and then they forced them into this contract, these negotiations. But we're going to get to all of it here on Conservative Cat Cities 92.9. Smash that like button and share this out with your friends. Woo! Hey, good morning. It's Conservative Cat on Cities 92.9, the news and talk of Bloomington Normal. We are your holiday home on the airwaves. Whether you're basting your turkey, setting the table, or simply sitting back and soaking in that holiday spirit, we are here bringing you the Thanksgiving special of Conservative Cat, the true story of Thanksgiving. Now, before I took the break, I was telling you a little bit about Tisquantum. Tisquantum, bitter guy, like I said, he was upset about the Patuxet tribe being wiped out. Okay. His whole family was wiped out by the time he got back to North America from being enslaved in Spain by British sailors. Roman Catholics, by the way, set him free. He went to London, learned English. Now, Tisquantum, he had plans for reestablishing this Patuxet tribe. Now, the Patuxet tribe, like I said, it was the Wampanoag Confederation tribe. So there's multiple tribes within the Wampanoag Confederation. It had been wiped out way before the Pilgrims had even gotten there by disease. Okay, so what Tisquantum did, now, this is after, of course, the negotiations happened. The only reason why the negotiations happened between the Pilgrims and the Native Americans in the Wampanoag Confederation and Massasoit, the political leader there, the only reason why those negotiations happened was because Edward Winslow raised up his hand and said, take me as a sacrifice. I'm willing to be a hostage. If you're willing to sit down with negotiations, let's stop fighting, because there was a surprise attack on the settlement there of the Pilgrims. They came into the camp. They fled up the hill. The foreigners, the white foreigners, the Pilgrims, they fled up the hill, grabbed the cannons, and then they fought back. But in order to get to this alliance agreement, what had to happen was Edward Winslow offering himself up as a sacrifice. And Tisquantum, he wanted to reestablish the Patuxet tribe. Okay, now, like I said, Squanto, not friendly guy, bitter guy, and he tried to play the Pilgrims and Massasoit against one another after the negotiations happened. Okay, so the whole deal with the negotiations was that the Pilgrims were going to help Massasoit fight this neighboring tribe, this rival tribe, the Narragansett tribe. Okay, so he hatched a plot in 1622. That's Tisquantum, and he said to the colonists, to the Pilgrims, that Massasoit was going to double cross them when they were leading a joint attack. There was a joint attack planned against the rival tribe, the Narragansett tribe. Okay, so he attempted to trick the Pilgrims into attacking Massasoit. You see, and he said, "Don't go into war with him. He's going to double cross you. Don't do it. Don't do this attack on the rival tribe." And this didn't work. Tisquantum, sorry, Betty, it didn't work. Cooler heads prevailed, and Massasoit actually learned of Tisquantum's failed plot, and the Pilgrims demanded that he not be executed. Okay, so Massasoit, after learning about this plot, wanted to kill Squanto. They demanded that the Pilgrims hand him over for execution, and the Pilgrims refused to do it. They said, "No, we're not going to do that. We don't want him to die." So Massasoit arranged, to a complete cutoff from Plymouth, including trade. So Massasoit, he was mad about this, that the Pilgrims would not give over to Squantum to die. And he was very upset. And this hit Plymouth really, really hard. The Pilgrims in Plymouth really, really hard. And now remember, this was after negotiations happened. This was after an alliance was made. Massasoit made this move to cut off trade. There was a drought that summer, and it withered away their crops. People died. Tisquantum would never leave Plymouth. Now, Tisquantum naturally could never leave Plymouth without an escort. Eventually, he died. Returning from a diplomatic trip to Southeast Cape Cod. So eventually he died, but he was kind of, I guess, enslaved-ish, captive. He wasn't allowed to leave without an escort to Squantum, okay? Obviously, they were probably trying to protect him, the Pilgrims. They didn't want him to die. He could have been executed, and the Pilgrims could have, said, here you go, Massasoit. It would have been way easier on them because they had their trade cut off with the Indians. So as for Massasoit and the Wampanoag tribe, they actually had peace with the Pilgrims. Peace as in, they didn't do any trade or anything like that because of the whole Squantum thing, but they had peace. They weren't fighting with each other. And that lasted for 50 years until 1675, when one of Massasoit's sons comes into the picture, and he launches an attack, and that triggered a conflict that would encompass all of New England. Okay, so this son of his, Massasoit's son, launched an attack, and it threw the entire New England geographical area into conflict. Everybody was fighting. The European traders, the Native American tribes were fighting each other. White people, Native Americans, they were all fighting each other. So the Europeans, they won ultimately that war. And that war would have never started, that conflict would have never started had it not been for Massasoit's son, who launched the original attack. Okay, so groups like the Narragansett were also taken out by disease. I want to take a quick break. We're going to talk about this here next. But we're going to talk about, the war. Like I said, 50 years of peace until 1675. With their new negotiations, remember that surprise attack, and then Edward Winslow throwing himself up as a hostage, which triggered negotiation talks, and then they came up with an alliance agreement. But of course, Squanto screwed up, and the Pilgrims wouldn't give him over to Massasoit to die and to be executed. And now they didn't have any trade or anything, but they did have peace. They had peace with the Pilgrims that lasted 50 years. And then Massasoit's son goes and screws it all up and throws us into a big old war. And the Europeans ultimately won that war. Now, in large, the reason why the Europeans won the war was because of diseases, smallpox, the epidemic of 1633, the epidemic of 1616, groups like the Narragansett tribe, they were all taken out because of diseases largely. Okay, that's the reason why the Europeans won. It was diseases. So I've got to take a quick break. You're listening to Conservative Cat on Cities 92.9, the news and talk of Bloomington Normal. Yeah, that's probably why there are a few examples of early Americans eating humans to survive. Indian cannibalism as well. Yeah, so they were a lot of what happened in this conflict was diseases, and this kind of ties into it, the cannibalism thing. Okay, so there was a lot of fighting going on. This triggered like a world war. Okay, all around New England, it was Native Americans were fighting Native Americans, European settlers were fighting Native Americans, everybody was fighting each other. And you have, of course, Massasoit's son. One of them triggered this war with an attack against the Pilgrims. And there was a war, a conflict that broke out, and it encompassed all of New England. So the cannibalism kind of works in because there was a lack of food, wartime, right? It was all given to those who were, fighting in these wars. People were eating each other, and a lot of it was going on in the Indian tribes. Okay, like I said, and I don't think anybody would disagree, the Indian Native American way of life was not civilized. They did things like human sacrifices. They did things like eat each other. And that's most likely why they were crushed by things like smallpox, by these diseases. They weren't, practicing good hygiene or anything like that. This was their way of life. And they were taken out by the diseases, whereas the, white people were not taken out by diseases as much. Now, they were still affected, obviously, by the smallpox epidemic of 1633, but ultimately the Europeans won this major conflict. Their societies were destroyed by weapons their opponents could not control. Okay, so the Native American societies were destroyed by disease largely. They were not wiped out by the Pilgrims. They were not wiped out by white people. In fact, all of the attacks or the aggression came from the Native American side. In fact, the Pilgrims had done themselves not too big of a favor here when they ended the trade with the Squanto. Okay, when they were they chose his life over the trade with Massasoit, and a lot of people died because of that. So it's not this whole like they were friends, and it's also not this whole like white people slaughtered Native Americans. There is some truth in the middle here, okay? And the truth is, the Native American tribes had very unorthodox tactics, war tactics, and that is what led to a massive war, and a lot of people died from diseases during this war because their efforts were focused on fighting and not surviving in this new world and in New England. So yeah, that's the truth. I'm so glad that you guys tuned in. We are going to be back. We're going to wrap up some of this story. I'm going to summarize a bit. Just another racist liar. Dude, I don't know. I don't know why a lot of people take issue with this story. It's the truth. Okay, there's primary documentation. There's documentation that had Native Americans, saying that they didn't like the white people because they were too talkative, or they looked funny, or they were short. But they were willing to deal with them because they really liked their stuff. They were like, okay, yeah, we love trading with you guys, but just don't permanently settle here. Now, I will acknowledge the Pilgrims permanently settled, which was a big no-no. Other European traders had attempted to do that. It was very rare. The Pilgrims did it because they were fleeing religious persecution. But they could have killed them right away, the Pilgrims, okay, for permanently settling. But they didn't, okay? And this is what ultimately winds up leading to this massive war. It's because of Massasoit, this leader, this political leader. He was scheming, and he wanted to use the Pilgrims as an ally against an enemy tribe. Okay, that's why. Haven't you ever questioned, why didn't the Native Americans just wind up killing the white people as soon as they came over? Have you ever wondered why? Because they could have easily. They could have easily come in and wiped out the entire, before they actually got a foothold and colonized, and they were able to take care of themselves and fight back, okay? They could have wiped them out right away. While they were still kind of settling, and while they were new, it was all new to them. But they didn't do that. Why? Because they wanted the Pilgrims to fight their battles for them, the Native Americans. Hey, good morning, Sudu. Appreciate you. We are celebrating gratitude. We are gathering together. We're going to have some great food. This is a true tale. Okay, it's a true story, and there are some lively chats. You guys can go ahead and find me on YouTube, on Facebook, on Rumble. Grab a warm cup of cider, put up your feet, and baste the turkey, set the table, prep your pies, and I'm glad that you decided to listen to our holiday home, Cities 92.9 Conservative Cat. You can subscribe to the channel. It's on YouTube and on Rumble. Before we took the break, I was telling you about this conflict that broke out ultimately, which it was a result, really, of Massasoit. His son launched an attack that threw the entire New England population, everybody, Native Americans, European traders and settlers, it threw everybody into a war, like think World War, okay? And it's because Massasoit's son screwed up. There was 50 years of peace, okay? Now, peace is kind of like, I say that they weren't fighting each other for 50 years. Now, Massasoit the Wampanoag tribe, they withheld trade because they weren't willing to give Squanto back, because they didn't want to see him die and be executed, because Squantum, he actually plotted against Massasoit. He wanted to convince the Wampanoag Confederation that he would make a better leader, and he wanted to reestablish the Patuxet tribe. Okay, and because of this this failed plot, he was going to be executed by Massasoit. He learned of his plot, and Massasoit said, "Okay, I'm killing him." Now, mind you, Squantum was already imprisoned by Massasoit, the Native American leader, because he didn't trust him. Naturally, because Squantum was a bitter guy. He was really, really mean. He was a bitter guy because he lost his entire family. Okay, he lost his entire tribe. He was sold into slavery for 7 years, kind of warranted. Guy was a bit insane. Massasoit didn't trust him. For good reason, obviously, because he was plotting against him. There was a plot hatched in 1622. Massasoit tried to kill him, and he cut off all contact with Plymouth because Plymouth would not give Squantum back to Massasoit to kill. Okay, so Massasoit and the Wampanoag, they had peace because there was a negotiated deal, and the negotiated deal only came because a white guy was willing to enslave himself and throw himself into captivity and be a hostage. And he said, "I'll be a hostage if you guys will just stop fighting and come to the table and do some negotiations." Now, they did have a great Thanksgiving feast after this battle, and that was very common for people to feast after battle. And the reason why this battle happened was because you had these two interpreters who came in under the guise of reaching negotiations with the Massasoit tribe, the Wampanoag Confederation. Massasoit, he sent in these two interpreters, and he said, "Go talk with the Pilgrims." And they were talking for about an hour, and I guess Massasoit got impatient, or maybe it was planned. We don't know. There was an attack without warning. And they went into the foreigners' camp, the Pilgrims' camp, and the sudden entrance, of course, shocked the Europeans, and they withdrew from the camp and to the side of the hill where there was cannons, and they fought back. Okay, so ultimately, that war ended because of Edward Winslow saying, "Hey, I will sacrifice myself." He later turned out to be the governor of Plymouth. He said, "I'll be a hostage until we can reach negotiations." And those negotiations would not have happened had the white man not offered himself up as a sacrifice. And I hate to say this, but this is the truth. It's not that the Native Americans were massacred and genocide by the white people. And it's also not, the white people were, super, super nice to the Native Americans, and the Native Americans were friends of the white people. It's not at all. There's so much more to this story. And one thing that we can't forget is that, I understand that it was odd for Pilgrims to permanently settle. Like I said, the European traders never permanently settled. They understood that that was the Native Americans' land, and they never permanently settled. But the Pilgrims, it's important to remember, they were freedom seekers. They were fleeing religious persecution, and they were one of the only European traders who attempted this. Some others tried, and then you had the Native Americans come in and kill them right away. But the Pilgrims were facing religious persecution, and they permanently wanted to settle there, and they were allowed to, because they were political pawns in Massasoit's political scheme. He wanted them as an ally to go up against this rival tribe. He wanted them because his Wampanoag Confederation was dying from disease, and he needed strength. He needed to be strong to go up against. And they came to negotiations. They went and they were planning a joint attack against the Narragansett tribe, the rival tribe. Okay, so they were allowed to be there because the Native Americans forced them really into negotiations and an allyship. An alliance. Okay, that's why the Pilgrims remained there and they weren't killed right away. Have you ever asked yourself, I wonder why the Pilgrims weren't just killed right away by the Native Americans? It's because of a political scheme that Massasoit was plotting to go up against a rival tribe. He needed the Pilgrims. So, like I said, Massasoit's son, 50 years after peace, decided to screw all that up. And there was a conflict that broke out, a huge conflict, war, and it encompassed all of New England. Now, this needs to be said, the Europeans won, but they didn't win because of brute strength or because they were good fighters. They won because they outnumbered the natives. The natives died from diseases more often. I'm just going to say that. And they were crushed by the epidemic of smallpox in 1633. It wiped out entire tribes, okay? They had issues with diseases prior to this war breaking out, but it was enhanced because of war. They were so focused on the fighting that they weren't focused on, eating right. Somebody texted in, they said cannibalism was going on during this time period. Yes, that all led to their demise. So groups like the Narragansett tribe, the rival tribe of the Wampanoag Confederation, they died because of the epidemic of 1616, actually. And then they were hit again by the epidemic of 1633. So a third to half of the remaining Indians in New England died because of diseases and their societies were destroyed. I'd say the other half, maybe like the other half, so half of them died from things like starvation, things like eating cannibalism and smallpox, all that. Half of them died because of that. The other half, maybe due to war, like actual conflict and fighting. But these societies were largely destroyed by weapons their opponents could not control and did not know they had. They were not civilized society, Native Americans, okay? And I'm not disparaging them because of their culture of, it's not my culture and we shouldn't stand for it, where, you eat people or have human sacrifices, which was actually a thing. But the Indians were not wiped out by the Pilgrims. They were not. They were not wiped out by the Pilgrims. They were largely wiped out by disease, and they would have never gotten into a war or battle with the Pilgrims and with white people had it not been for Massasoit's son, who, after 50 years of peace, launched a random attack against the Pilgrims for whatever reason. So most battles that happened were started by the Indians. I mean, most battles, the two that, surrounded this, the major conflict that broke out in New England, that was because of Massasoit's son. The Massasoit launched a surprise attack when they were sitting there trying to negotiate terms for their alliance. They sent over 2 interpreters to go over there for an hour. They talked about reaching, an alliance to go after this rivaling tribe. But guess what Massasoit did? He got impatient and he went into their camp and destroyed everything. And then, of course, they fought back with the cannons. And it took a white guy, Edward Winslow. I don't want to forget Edward Winslow. It took a white guy to stop the fighting and to say, I'm going to enslave myself. I'm going to be held hostage. In exchange, will you please just sit down for negotiations? That and for an alliance. That's what led to Thanksgiving. And then they had a dinner. Okay, so let me know. Is that at all what you were told in grade school? Probably not. What is Thanksgiving? Children in the U.S. are taught to celebrate, the friendship between the Native American tribes and the first settlers. It wasn't even really a friendship. They had peace for 50 years. And that was because of the work that Massasoit did with the Pilgrims into this alliance and the negotiations. And really, it was because Edward Winslow was willing to have himself remain as a hostage in order to reach those negotiations. But it's not about the friendship. And even then, during that 50 years of peace, the Native Americans withheld trade because we wouldn't give over, the English settlers wouldn't give over to Squanto. Or Squantum, because Squantum was going to die and they didn't want to see him die, even though he had arranged a plot to try to get the colonists to wage war against Massasoit. So it's not a friendship. It's also not English settlers wiping out the Native American society. And I want to be very clear, I'm not against the Native American society and Massasoit doing what he did. It was all immoral. I'm against it as from a morality standpoint. However, I understand that what he was doing was he was trying to ensure the survival of his tribe, the Wampanoag Confederation, and the only way he could have done that was by creating an alliance with the Pilgrims and going up against the Worry to the west, the Narragansett tribe, the rival tribe. I understand all of that, and but we just got to stop fighting. It's just insane, the lies that have been spread about the revisionist history that has been going on. All right, you guys, I'm going to be right back. It's Conservative Cat Cities 92.9. What tribes committed cannibalism? Yeah, I mean, come on, folks. It was wartime, okay? They were dying of starvation. And, there was not this civilized, modernized way of life that the Native Americans followed. This is very, very common. They would, cut out the hearts of people and, throw it up to the sun gods, right? This was their way of life. And I'm not disparaging that at all. But ultimately, they died because of those behaviors, okay? The proof is in the pudding. The Europeans won this major conflict, which, by the way, was started by Massasoit's son. They could have all lived in peace, and they reached this negotiations. And they all could have lived in peace. But unfortunately, you have Massasoit's son who came in and launched this attack. And unfortunately, this war broke out. And a lot of people died. A lot of people died, which is why the English settlers ultimately prevailed, was because they had different tactics during the war to try to survive the diseases. I don't know if the English settlers participated in cannibalism, but the proof is in the pudding in that they won. So most likely they didn't resort to these behaviors that opened them up more to these wild diseases that wiped out the Native American societies. So, yeah, smash that like button, share this out with your friends. I so do appreciate you tuning in. We are going to come back and I'm going to wrap up the show. I challenge you today. Go purchase this book. It's the 2005 book by Charles Mann. There's primary documentation in there that he references. It's called 1491, A Revisionist History of the Pre-Columbian Americans that renders my idea of the first Thanksgiving rather boring. I don't think it's boring. I really don't think that this story is boring at all. Yeah, he gave a lot of historical accounts, and I think that we were just lied to. Squantum was not a friendly Indian. In fact, the reason why, really, this war. Come on, guys. No antis. Gosh, this is wild. Like I said, I don't know if the Pilgrims were Jewish or if they were Christian. I really don't care, because that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is that they were fleeing religious persecution. The Church of England mandated them to worship their God a certain way, and they fled that situation, and they wanted to permanently settle in the New World, and they were granted that permanent settlement by the Indians. It was all they were privy to them settling. They were all for it. It wasn't like somebody came in and took their land from under their nose. That's not how it worked. We're going to be right back. I'm going to take a quick break. You're listening to Conservative Cat. Woohoo! Hey, good morning. I so do appreciate you tuning in each and every single day. And thank you for sticking with me here on Conservative Cat. We're your holiday home on the airwaves. And we cried, we laughed, we told the story of the true Thanksgiving. Okay, we're celebrating gratitude. And I encourage you to have this conversation with your kids around the dinner table while you're stuffing your face with your favorite pie. Okay, talk about the Edward Winslows, talk about how he offered himself up as a hostage in order to reach the negotiations with the Native Americans. Talk about how Massasoit, and I know I made him kind of out to be a villain, but really he was just trying everything he could. Immoral things, very immoral things. He did a surprise attack, launched a surprise attack on the Pilgrims when they were trying to reach negotiations, and they were talking with the two interpreters, Somerset and Squanto. The Pilgrims were talking with them, and then he got impatient, and I guess he just launched a surprise attack. I'm not trying to vilify him or make him out to be a villain. What I am saying is that he tried everything to ensure that the Wampanoag Confederation continued to exist. He was trying to avoid complete decimation of his confederation, and I mean every leader does that. You see that today, where your legislators do very immoral things in order to get more money to their district or to benefit them. Massasoit wanted to benefit his family. He had some sons, and ultimately his son launched an attack that threw us into a big old war, and he ended 50 years of peace. He does not go down in history as a hero, and I don't think Massasoit goes down in history as a hero, but there is a much bigger picture here. So I appreciate you tuning in. I hope you guys stuff your face and drink a lot of apple cider, and maybe you're tuning in to the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. I hope that you have a blessed Thanksgiving. And I love you. Jesus loves you. And say a prayer for everybody, the Native Americans, for your ancestors, whether you're Native American or Pilgrims. Say a prayer and thank God that we have this wonderful this country that was the New World and is known as America. I'm extremely grateful for America and the way it exists today, and that we don't live in a time period like our ancestors did. Bye-bye. Love you so much, and you guys have a good one.